Hello, and welcome back to another installment of Disciple Makers. In this particular series, you get to meet my beautiful wife, Catherine, and we share about how we do ministry together and what that looks like, and just things we've learned. Most people would think through a very small amount of time as a married couple and also as a pastor and his wife. And so, how are you, my love?
I'm great.
Yeah, I know our boys are here with us, so just bear with us. Today we're going to talk about boundaries, pressure, and being under the microscope, if you will, where people examine our lives and they evaluate who we are as we not only do family life, but as we minister to them. And so that's going to be the topic for today. Do you have any thoughts as we get started?
No, but I'm sure we'll expound on all of those. So,
It's going to be fine. All right. So, the first thing that we want to talk about is the pressure of being an example couple. Now, one of the things that always comes, whether good, bad, or ugly, is that if someone goes into ministry, primarily if a man is called to be a pastor, an elder, deacon, a teacher, a leader of some kind, there's always this idea that we need to be above reproach.
mhm.
And one of the biggest ways of doing that is by the way we live life at home, the way we lead our families, our wives, and our children, and always being looked at as examples to the congregation. Now, mind you, I think we both have seen how that sometimes gets out of hand when people put pastors on a pedestal. And then there's even the idea of the pastor's children being pastors' kids. And that can either be a very good thing or it can be a horrible thing. So here's the first question. Okay. How does it feel to know people are watching our marriage?
It used to feel really intimidating and make me feel very self conscious because I did sort of feel that pressure. Some of it I think was unwarranted, and I put that pressure on myself as an expectation. And some of it I think was pressure from others. But regardless, I still felt the pressure. And so initially I felt very self conscious and mostly didn't want to make you look bad as your wife. I wanted people to be able to say, wow, his wife really supports him or was a credit to you, basically. Now, I don't mind it quite so much. I think partially because we've grown and are more confident in our own marriage. But I also think it allows us to set the example for others. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's not supposed to be perfect. And our own issues or trials that we have worked through and resolved are learning experiences for others and a way for us to minister to them. So I don't mind it so much anymore. It's still something that's always kind of in the back of my mind, but it doesn't quite give me the same, I don't know, anxiety or concern.
Okay. So one of the things that I would share for us, especially from my perspective, at the beginning, I took myself way too seriously. I still struggle with that sometimes. What has been a great help to me personally is having good people that I can turn to, that I know are going to let me be me, not just, be careless
Right.
or raunchy or anything like that, but just be who I am with all of my warts, imperfections, and also with all of the good things I bring to the table. And it helps to know that people pray for me and that they pray for us. Again, I want to sing the praises of where God has brought us to because I think it speaks to the quality of God's work in our lives and His grace for us in leading us to a good church. Every Monday, there's a group of people who gather to pray, and I try to be there every Monday. And so far, I think I have like a 99% record of being there, unless I'm outside. Because, for example, last year we went on mission to Mexico and did some other travel. But on Mondays, we gather together to pray. And what I love about that is that the people who gather to pray, pray not only for the sick, those who are facing challenges, lost loved ones, etc. They pray for us. They
Right.
pray for me as the pastor, the lead elder. They pray for you, the boys. And then we also pray for the other elders, their wives, their kids, their families. And that really warms my heart because there's a certain level of comfort and trust that we can be who we are and that people will understand that this is who God has made us to be. This is where we are on our discipleship journey, thinking altogether like John Bunyan with the Pilgrim's Progress. Everyone is along that way, that road, right?
Right.
Between the city called Apollyon or even to the eternal city, to that glorious city. And so to me, it feels nowhere near as daunting or as sometimes imprecatory, meaning making me feel guilty, knowing that I'm not perfect, I don't have it all together, and people are watching me. But it also helps me now to be more honest with myself, knowing that people are looking at me, to try to put my best foot forward by praying for the church, praying for myself, knowing that people are watching me, and that for better or for worse, some people might make the determination about Christ based upon who I carry myself to be in the community, at home, and also here at the church. So I think it's, to me, I see it now more as a blessing more than I see it as a burden. And that's only because we are surrounded by some very good people. Here's the other question: how do we stay authentic without oversharing? Because that's very important as we do life in ministry. How do we maintain ourselves being authentic with all of our imperfections, with all of our growth that needs to happen still, but also being people who are deeply committed to our faith, people who love others deeply, and who, we have our quirks, we have our own personalities. So, how do we do that without oversharing to a point of almost being too much?
Well, I think first part of that comes in with the boundaries of us respecting each other's desire for certain things to be private. Not everything that we discuss is to share. And I think if one and or both of us prefers that a situation stay between us, then it's not shared. It doesn't matter who it's with. And that's just part of that boundary thing. I think the other part of it is finding a small group of people or even one person that you can be more open with. That's not to say that we are not honest about some of our flaws or shortcomings, but not everything is for public consumption either. Some of the things we struggle with or things we've learned or whatever it is are not meant for everybody or not meant for everybody even right away. If it's something we're working through, it doesn't need to be put on display. And so I think having that person, like I have my very best friend who I can tell anything to, and I know she's not going to judge me. And it also is kind of nice because she's not a church member. At one point, I mean, we went to the same church, but she doesn't, she knows who I am and what I'm called to, but she doesn't hold me to an unrealistic standard because of that. She's very real with me and understands that I am also just a person. And so I'm going to have my own struggles. And so we can encourage each other in each other's struggles too. But for me as a pastor's wife, it's really important to me because what I share or struggles I might have to do with you sometimes because guess what? We're married and, it is what it is.
I'm still
And
being
so
glorified, folks. The Lord's still working on my sanctification.
And so some of those things, I have to be really mindful how much I share because I don't want to ever give the poor impression of you to those who may not be able to handle it well or would be overly judgmental and not give you grace. And so finding that person that you can confide in honestly, but is also going to be encouraging and not judgmental about the things you share is really important. And I think that can help safeguard against oversharing because you have that outlet if you need someone to encourage you in those things. Now, if it's us, we need to be dealing with us with each other and being mindful not to use somebody else as an outlet and avoid our own issues.
And I think that's something we've learned very well over the last decade plus of marriage, you and I, where at first I think it was very easy to talk to someone else about each other because we were learning our marriage. Then this is a shameless plug for Family Life, Weekend to Remember, and also some of Dr. Deal's marriage books and family dynamics and things like that. Not to mention any of the courses I took while going to Liberty University to finish both my masters. Being able to talk to people directly, so communication keeps coming up, very important. But I think when it's picking your audience for the right message. So, for example, I do share openly with people with the prayer group, but I know that they are people that I can trust, that I can talk to, and they will keep it private, even
Right.
within that group. They don't get to hear everything about our marriage. There's a handful of men that I would call at any time, say, hey, we're struggling with this. I'm struggling with this. Can you help me out? Can you pray for us? What would you do? And two of them are Vasquez's. One is Jorge, who lives in Lubbock, and the other one is Steven, who lives in South Texas, in Lytle. And those are the men that I can feel comfortable when I face something that truly challenges me, that I can talk to. Now, these are men outside of the church. And really and truly, because of the way God has blessed us here, I can go to the elders to talk to them, to just say, hey, this is where we are, which is part of what was part of the search process. What did I envision from them? It's a partnership. I know I'm not perfect. I know at the time that we got here was right. And now I'm looking at getting closer to 40, which is still fairly young for pastors, statistically speaking. But being able to talk to the elders and they know that I'm not perfect, please don't hold me in a pedestal. Pray for me, correct me when I need correction. Don't make it a thing where it becomes a thing that blows up. So for us, that has been the first way to share without oversharing is knowing the audience. There are certain
Right.
things that only you and I know, and that's the way it's supposed to be. And also, it goes to the other end when we're dealing with boundaries and communication. You don't get to know everything I know from the church because that is not your role. Your role is simply to know, hey, I had a rough day. Just pray for me, for
Right.
wisdom, for guidance. But you don't get to know all the sultry details when someone comes to counsel with me, when someone comes asking for prayer, when someone comes. Now, if they say it's okay to share it with you, especially if it's a woman in the church, then that also allows you to be a part of the ministry to that person.
Right.
But there's always that boundary, knowing your audience, knowing the message, and knowing that if we're not perfect, and this is something to cultivate, I think, as we cultivate here at the church, is just be open about it, know the limits of what you share. So I think that that's been helpful. Any other thoughts to that? Okay, man, we're doing good. Okay, so here's a good one. And this is one I think people have praised us for here at Vista Grande. Not that we do this often. We don't want to make it sound like we just do this often, but what do we do when we argue publicly?
Um,
Do we argue publicly? What do we do when we argue publicly?
well, I think we initially lacked discretion and we would sometimes get a little too involved with certain disagreements and didn't always know how to put them on pause if we needed to. Now, I would say for the most part, I mean, it still happens. We don't have like screaming matches in public, obviously. I would hope not. But it's obvious when we don't agree on something, right? And so I think if possible, we do try to find a more private space to finish the discussion if it needs to be had. I think we've also learned that we don't have to win. It can be a disagreement and maybe it's all right, well, we'll deal with this later, right? Like this isn't urgent, we can figure it out later. We don't have to have an answer right now if we don't automatically agree. Or sometimes it's just, hey, you know what? It's not the decision I would have made, but it's really not that big of a deal. Okay, let's move on. So I think we've been better about that. And there are times when I think we know we've like, okay, this is a hot button thing that we need to discuss, but obviously now is not the time. So
Right.
I think we both have learned to make that mental note and say, you know what, we need to address this when we get home, when we have a better opportunity to discuss it and it's not necessarily for public consumption.
Right. I think one of the things I've noticed is when we first got married, it was very easy to just make sure that we knew we were ticked or mad at each other. I think now we have learned that it's better to wait to be in private. It's better to handle this at home. And I don't think that we've had, especially more recently, occasions to show our displeasure in such a way that it becomes a public argument. A lot of that has been, again, good mentorship, going on retreats and getting away, working on intentional breaks from the rhythms of life, because
Hmm.
that has definitely helped. And that's something that you even mentioned to me as we've talked about our communication, our marriages. The more intentional we've been to work on our marriage, to keep each other central with Christ as the head of our relationship, the less issues we've had, the more, I guess you could say, the more oneness, to borrow from family lives, we can remember that we experience because we're not confronting each other. We're working together,
Right,
even in in the difficulties and the challenges, whether it's family related, extended family related, work related, etc.
right,
And I will say, I tell the church in reality, not even jokingly, I tell them this has been the easiest church to pastor so far, in that we are able to the elders are wonderful support, a wonderful support system. Their spouses are wonderful in their ministry uniqueness as they come and plug in, and people talk to each other. Now, none of us are perfect. We still have some little miscommunications here and there, but they're easily resolvable in the simple sense that we are able to move forward, understanding and admitting when someone's at fault. And I love that. Not only in our marriage, but even in ministry, that has been a huge help so far. So that's just my thought. All right, moving forward then, we look into setting boundaries with church members. Now, this was a challenge at the get-go. Now it's become a little better, but I think a lot of it has to do with the distinctive culture of the church and how people view the pastor. I think it's fair to say that there are churches that see the pastor as a butler for hire, and so he's there to acquiesce to people's needs and demands. And then there's the other end where it's also not healthy, where the pastor just comes, preaches, and he has nothing to do or say, and that's also not healthy.
Right.
I think one of the things I like to remind people when they want to compliment me is to say, I'm happy I get to be a sheepdog under the good shepherd. Because the sheepdog, all he has to do is follow the lead, go and try to wrangle the sheep in, keep him in the fold as best he can, and then always pointing the sheep not to himself as a sheepdog, but facing them and grouping them to face the shepherd.
Right.
So I'm thankful to be the sheepdog to the good shepherd. So here's the first question that has to do in dealing with boundaries with church members. What boundaries do we enforce around time and availability?
I think we have really now worked on trying to protect your days off.
Yes.
Because we do know that on your days that you're not off, you are very much busy. And I get that. And so, and this is something we had talked about was if I know we have some protected time, I'm way less concerned or upset about the time that you are away
Mm-hmm.
because I know there's time that's meant for us. And so I think that's really helped. You know, we really try to protect your days off and have them for family or rest at home or whatever those things
Or things
are.
that need to be done, especially now as we're looking into a home. So,
Right. And getting those things taken care of and just more intentional time with each other. But I think what's also helped is we've learned to be flexible. You know, there are things that come up that happen on a weekend because that's the only time those events can happen. But you've been better about, I think, compromising on your time and saying, okay, well, I put all this time on the weekend, so I'm going to spend a little more time. I'm not going to stay at late work, or I'll leave a little bit later in the morning and spend more time at home, or those sorts of things to still allow for some of that time at home. Um, and kind of keeping those boundaries. I don't really have the boundary problem because I don't function the same way you do in the church. So it's a little bit easier for me to say no because people don't ask that much of me.
right.
So for you, I think it's harder because you want to do well. It was really hard in the beginning.
Yeah.
Um, you
Pe-
almost never said no,
Being a
actually.
people pleaser by heart is very hard, but it's been one of the greatest things I've learned through the chaplaincy training
Mhm.
at the Cristo Santa Rosa system in San Antonio, working as a chaplain for hospice, and also just working outside of what is a typical church setting, is learning how to manage your time and being able to tell people I'm off. And even if it comes with some heartburn to say I'm off, it has to be something truly emergent for me to be able to now say, okay, I'll be there.
Right. And I think that's something we've come to an understanding. Like, I understand when emergencies happen. Now, and I think that's something you've learned too is an emergency is a unique situation. But those things that can wait for office hours, been as time has gone on, you've refined that and saying, hey, look, we'll deal with this tomorrow.
Right.
Nothing I can do about it right now. And you've also set those boundaries by encouraging people to do the work. Hey, this is something you want to do. Let me give you the tools. You can go do it. It's not something you feel necessary to always take on anymore. And that also helps create that, well, it's not just going to be, you're going to do it for me all the time, which people get used to if you let them. And
Right.
so having some of those lines, I think, has been really helpful.
So I will say for me, just kind of going with the same question and just providing my perspective. One, at first, it was very much almost an undertone of ministry. You have to do it because you're
Hmm.
the pastor and you need to do this, 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 and this. Now it's more of my role is to empower and to train people, which is the biblical definition of a pastor. And my role is to ensure that those who are called to do ministry are well equipped with the word, with the resources that we have available so that they can succeed at what they're doing. And so that's become liberating so that I don't have to be at every event. I don't have to be the one leading it or hosting it. And even here at Vista Grande, something that has really helped is that I said, hey, I'm not going to be doing that. I want to empower people to lead. I want to empower people to serve. I'll fight for people to have the resources they need to have within our means. And then that frees up a lot because I'm not the focal point. And that's something that I would encourage whoever's watching this is to consider that a pastor is not supposed to be the focal point of the church. And if you have this mentality that the pastor is the center of the church, I would encourage you to change your tune real quickly because number one, that leads to you putting that man on a pedestal. Two, it does not glorify Christ
Right.
when the pastor is the star of the show. And number three, it also creates unwarranted expectations that can lead to the pastor feeling burdened by things that he shouldn't.
Or burnt out. It can burn out a pastor really quick and his family
Right.
because it puts this burden of guilt on the pastor a lot of times because he can't deliver and no one steps up and there's this expectation, well, we've always done it or the pastor's always done it. And so then, out of but well-meaning intentions, he'll follow through, and any family he has can really often feel left on the sidelines and just sort of not important
Right.
because his attention is always somewhere else.
Well, and some of the things that have helped, especially that I learned moving into a senior pastor role, the calendar is my best friend. It's not a burden. So we try to communicate through our family calendar, the
Yes.
church calendar. If people want to have time with me, there's usually a Google form that it fills out, and then I schedule my time,
Hmm.
and people know these are my work hours. I am at the office. If I'm not, I'm somewhere else, either shopping for things, visiting somebody, or going to a ministry event. But by and large, people know that if they come to the office, we have this office that was reworked. We have the waiting area that was reworked, and people
Right.
can find us and they can come here and we want them to. So they
Right.
know that I'm available. Number two is we also have the expectation, even from the elders, right now in this stage of life, Friday, Saturday are my days off. That means that on Friday, I'm not coming to the office. If I plug into the computer into something, it's for what I want to do. Usually it's more for what you need me to do at home, what the boys need. Sometimes we may go do something fun. That's also when our date nights are happening now that we are more intentional on that. And so people usually tend to leave me alone unless something crazy
Right.
does come up. And then number one, two, three. Number three is also learning to say no. And learning to say no has enables me to say yes to things that are important. So I don't have to do everything. I don't have to be here for everything. But by empowering others to say yes, I don't have the burden to say yes all the time. So those are the ways that I have created those boundaries. But it helps that from the get-go, when I was being interviewed to be the pastor here, that was an open conversation with the staff, Annalie, with the elders, Brett, Fred, and Stan. And then also just the way we communicate, the empowering to the membership of the church. So I think that's how we've been able to set those boundaries that are healthy for us. That rolls into the next one, into the next point. How do we say no without guilt?
Well, I think it's practice and I think it's priorities. When you have your priorities where they're supposed to be, it is so much easier to say no without guilt. And I also think because we've worked on being intentional with our time, it makes it easier for both of us because being involved in some of the things that I'm in the church, we want to have meetings with the women's ministry or do these things. And so I have to plan those too. And sometimes I have to say, no, I have school with the kids. I can't adjust it this week. That's not going to work. And they're very understanding. But I also know if there's things that I want to do, if I'm doing them during your work hours, then I'm not affecting our family time. And you kind of know the same thing. And so I think that goes back to that communication of, hey, if we're going to do something during time where it was family or someone's asked, we let each other know. And if that doesn't work, hey, no, we can't. Um, I think a lot of that is just understanding perspective and priorities.
Mm-hmm.
In particular for you, because it is so easy for people to say, but you're the pastor.
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't you do this or do that? You tend to naturally be a people pleaser. And so I think that's something, not only can you sometimes naturally be a people pleaser, you are a type A overachiever. And those two things definitely make you want to do well and not let people down and not let things, quote unquote, fall apart or fall behind. And those are not bad things, but they do lend themselves to the temptation of not setting boundaries or or I set the boundary, but now I feel awful because I didn't follow through. I think that's also something that's really a heart to heart with God. Help
Mhm.
me not carry this guilt that I shouldn't because I'm prioritizing properly.
And so, just the one thing I would add to that is we need to remember ministry starts at home. My relationship with you and the boys comes before any other relationship, because if the home is not well managed,
Right.
then I'm not qualified according to scripture to manage the house of God and the children of God, his sheep. So that's very important. We should have the perception and outlook that saying no empowers us to say yes to the important things. So
Right.
again, family time, your devotion time with God, spending time with him, getting to walk closer with him. Those are the top two tiers, and really and truly is your time with God, then your time with your family. And then out of that, if those two relationships are well cared for, then we're going to be okay to take care of everyone else, because
Right.
then everything is flowing naturally as intended in scripture. Here's another one that goes into the power of saying no and having more freedom because of that. And we've been doing a little bit better about it lately. Is what does protecting that date night look like for us?
Scheduling, scheduling, scheduling. Really and truly, I think for us, that's what works. Whenever it's been more vague or, hey, maybe sometime this week, things always come up that end up seeming more important. And so looking a month ahead and saying, all right, this is our date night and this is where we're going to do it. Whatever that looks like. I mean, some of our date nights have been a little more elaborate. Some of them have been, we've gone up to the crest and spent no money and we took a picnic and we watched the sunset, and it didn't have to be extravagant, but it was just time alone,
If
although it was
you
really, really cold.
if you are ever in the Albuquerque area and you want to have a nice date, especially in the summer, just drive up right before the sun sets to the crest, take a nice picnic. It can be some sandwiches, or it can be like a charcuterie board. And so you don't have to spend hundreds of dollars for one evening. It can be something low key as long as you're spending time with each other. It boils down to intentionality. Being able to say, like in any other relationship, you spend time and money on things that are important to you. So spending time and money on this relationship helps cultivate a healthy marriage, a healthy ministry, a healthy family altogether. And so I think that is the biggest thing, intentionality.
I agree. And I think, while date nights are good and I definitely don't want to discount those because that time away doing something different is good. There were times where that wasn't possible during COVID. You couldn't really go out. And
Nor
during
did
that,
you want to, because
you're right.
people were wearing underwear for masks. That's crazy.
And during that same time, we were also in a flux transition with careers anyway, so we didn't really have a lot of expendable income to just go out to dinner. Anywho, and so we would find ways to we would have a date night in, and we would have a movie night after the kids went to bed, right? And make a special dish or whatever. Or I myself have set boundaries at home. After a certain time, there are things I don't do, so we can try to spend more time together even at home and be a little more intentional with those things rather than me just going and cleaning after the kids are going to bed or things like that. Those were areas I had to really limit myself and say, well, just because I'm home doesn't mean I just keep busy. I focus on you. And there's a cutoff, and sometimes dishes can wait. You are more important than dishes, or whatever the case may be. So it's also showing that intentionality day to day. And it also ends up making the date nights more enjoyable, I think, because it's not like, oh, we got to check this box off because we never do it at home. And so we're trying to like
Right.
shove it in somewhere. We're being conscious about it more often.
Right. And also, I think what helps protect date night is, again, we need to keep dating each other. We cannot take each other for granted. And so,
Oh,
I mean, I'm being serious. If we're going to take care of our marriage so that we do not become a statistic of pastors in ministry where we disqualify ourselves, or I disqualify myself because I'm not taking care of you, then I need to continue to treat you as though I'm still trying to win your heart over and over. And it may sound corny to some people, but it's the reality of marriage. It's a constant pursuit of your affections, your well-being, because as I do that, then it's a reciprocal thing. It's a cyclical thing. You also do that for me in your own way towards me. And while it may sound like it's self-seeking, it is not.
right.
Because again, because we are married, the Bible says we're one flesh. I'm taking care of the better part of me when I do that. So that's just my take on it. Yes, you can smile. Okay. So
Moving on.
here's the next one. And I think we both have gone through a lot with this one. How do we handle members who ignore boundaries? And I would include in this family members who also ignore boundaries.
We'll keep family members light. Well, to be honest, if we're talking specifically in ministry, because family is sort of its own dynamic, and not that you shouldn't have boundaries with family, but there's an added layer to extended family that's not only ministry
Right.
related, right? And so I think that's kind of a whole nother ball of wax, really. But is in regards to ministry and church members, I think it initially, I think it's a, hey, it's sort of a soft admonition, I guess you could say, almost of,
Hmm.
hey, you know what? This could probably wait till tomorrow. If it's something you want to deal with now, here's some ways to deal with it. When I get to the office tomorrow, I'll do XYZ. Not too many people break my boundaries for me personally because, again, they're not generally seeking me out quite the same way as they do you. But in breaking your boundary, they end up breaking mine
Right.
because it affects our dynamic. I think I used to try to excuse it. And now I think it's been more of a, okay, we've kind of given this reminder. So I don't know that we've come into that yet here, but I think there have been instances where you've had to say, no, I can't talk about this right now. I'll call you back tomorrow. Or someone called you on vacation once. And it was kind of like, I think you had, I think, a quick conversation. It was like, hey, I'm on vacation. I'll deal with this when I get back. So I think it's just not being afraid to do that. If I ever ran into that issue and it was a persistent problem, it would probably be a very loving but honest, hey, listen, this is time we really try to protect for our family. Unless it's an emergency, I can deal with this during these days.
Right. So I think for me, being the pastor of a church, the biggest thing that I try to do is I used to try to skirt the problem before or try to your point, excuse it. Now what I do is just address it directly as gently as possible. Like, hey, no, we cannot bring someone else into this conversation because you do not like my answer.
Mm-hmm.
Or no, we cannot do this simply because you want to have more support drummed up for your side. And we haven't had that issue happen nearly as much. But when it happens, what we do is sticking by convictions and
Mm-hmm.
principles of we're going to respect one another, respect the person who's doing it, and in love and grace say, this is not the way to do that, nor or the time, or it's not necessarily the best use of resources if it's something that has to do with ministry. When it comes to our family, I think we have had more respect and support lately than we had before, which is good. And when it comes also to having boundaries with people, whether they're family members in the church or just members of the church, sometimes it's also helpful to remember that not everyone has the same set of values for themselves or for their own families. So there's always this idea of we need to be okay with being who we are as a family unit, as a couple in ministry, as a pastor's wife, and people not getting it. They don't have to get it to understand that this is our line, and therefore we ask you to respect that.
Yeah. And I think it's been a lot of us just communicating with each other when those situations arise and having that discussion and respecting each other's, it may not bother you, but it may bother me. But you
Right.
recognize that. And so, hey, we discussed and no, we really don't want to sacrifice this time. And so we're not going to. And we're united at that final decision that we make or how we approach it. Or, hey, no big deal. If you needed to do something on a Friday morning, I was going to go grocery shopping anyway. So then we can focus our time when we're all back home
That's
together,
right.
or, some of those compromises, but we're communicating with each other in it.
Right. Sounds good. All right. We're getting to another segment of this particular conversation that deals with gossip, criticism, and church politics. We've had our share of those things.
Yes.
I think we've learned how to better handle things, and experience is something you cannot buy, so
Right.
we are thankful for that, even though at the time we would have been okay with not having to gain the experience. So what is the hardest criticism we've ever faced?
Collectively or individually?
Well, let's talk about our marriage. What's the biggest
Um,
thing we've faced?
I would say probably the harshest criticism we faced. And while it may have been true on some levels, still was difficult. After our first pastoral calling, we were dealing with a lot of church hurt and
Hmm.
healing. And part of that because we were dealing with all these struggles, you and I were not communicating well. We were in a very stressful time. We kind of went into this almost survival mode sort of thing. And a lot of people did notice that we really weren't quite in sync anymore. And I don't know if anyone ever mentioned it to you, but I had a few who did mention it to me. I found it very frustrating because I thought, well, you don't know our marriage. You're not seeing what we do every day. And some of it wasn't accurate because they didn't know everything that we dealt with, but some of it was. And obviously, the tension was enough. It was sort of bleeding it out into other areas, and we weren't managing it well. We were trying, but we were kind of flailing, it felt like sometimes. And so, in regards to us and our marriage, I would say that was probably hard. Maybe people haven't said thanks to me as often as they have to you, but is probably the most obvious one where they've dealt with our marriage directly,
Right.
as far as that goes.
Okay, fair enough. I would think that if we're looking into the context of a church as a married couple, the harshest criticism we always faced was our age thing, which we've learned that time takes care of that. There's far more gray growing and also now coming down here that shows up, but that's just something that was always the biggest thing, and everything had to do with experience, which again, when you go into a church in your late 20s, things shift and then expectations change and you have to adapt on the fly. You're going to learn that. Now it's going to come with growing pains, but what I think made it difficult for us addressing that period of time once we went back to San Antonio in Texas, it was also dealing with not knowing who to trust.
Right.
Right. And that was the biggest thing. I think that's where the frustration was bleeding out, which now we are working better, even at working with our children who were also affected by it. Definitely the oldest too. But learning that it's okay you're going to experience hurt in the church. There's a reason why Paul writes to the church in Corinth, writes to the church in Ephesus, and encourages them to hold each other up in love, which sometimes in church, when people are not in it for the right reason, especially in positions of leadership, love is not going to be the motivator to resolve conflict. Love is not going to be the motivator to try to resolve things. Is usually going to be power or influence, and
Hmm.
that's not good. So for us, I think it's been age-based criticism. I think another thing that has been the harshest thing is when people have expectation of us simply because of the calling we have, not remembering that we're still human. It may not be, they may say, well, yeah, we know you're human and we know that you're just another sinner saved by grace, but then they have expectation. Well, you're a pastor. Why don't you do this or why don't you do that? And just because we have the calling and the work of being an under shepherd and his wife, it does not mean that we don't get it wrong. It does not mean that we don't suffer through the pains and sorrows of dealing with, when people say bad things about us, when people dislike something that we decide is the best thing. And granted, it's easier when there's a group of people helping you lead. It's different when it's you and maybe another person that helps
Right.
you lead in the church. So those things definitely um, tend to be the things that get in the way. So I would say that's my answer for that question.
Well, I would say some of the other hard parts is when we faced individual criticism.
Right.
Most of the criticism that you get tends to be fairly public because you are more public in the church
Right.
and it's more open. People, for whatever reason, feel more free to talk about you. They conveniently don't talk to the pastor's wife or the pastor. Now, depending on what church you're in, sometimes gossip gets around real fast, so you hear it pretty quick. And I think that's hard when people aren't willing to come deal with you directly. And some of the criticisms we faced could have been resolved really easy if people had talked to us, talked to you, or talked to me in the cases where it's been an issue with me from the beginning instead of assuming we were just supposed to know. And then some things have just been out of pure spite and mean, and those are hard because there's not much you can do about it. And so trying to work through those things were hard, and there were some things that have happened with church hurt that were genuinely painful, and in some levels uncalled for. And so I think that was really hard because our hearts were not to try to bully people or for some sort of self gain, and then to have the work that you're trying to do sort of be thrown back in your face and basically accused of being all these awful things or not being honest or whatever it is when there wasn't proper communication beforehand is really hard.
Well, and I think that's also a good lesson for anyone who thinks about coming to ministry and serving in a church. You're gonna have churches that are healthy and well. You're gonna have churches that appear to be healthy and well, but are dealing with baggage of their own, and it's part of the human condition called sin. And then you're gonna have churches where everything is about looking the part, looking well enough so that it looks successful, regardless of who's looking at it. So
Right.
I think that's important. Let's go to the other one. Here's this one. I think we already answered a question in two, so I'm gonna go to this one. Should a pastor's wife defend her husband publicly?
No. Generally speaking, no. And here's why. You should be able to stand above reproach.
Right.
And that has nothing to do with me unless I made the poor decision, right? So if you are being attacked, you have not only God to fight that battle for you, but if you know you have done nothing wrong, you should be able to stand above reproach. Now, I've never been put in this position, but we have talked about this in cases where we suspected it could become an issue. If I were to ever hear gossip about you and you were not around to defend yourself, then I would say something. I would never get in an argument, but it would be something along the lines of, that is gossiping and that is not appropriate. If you have a problem with my husband and or pastor, however it would come in that sentence, then you need to go deal directly with him. But what you're doing is not appropriate.
Right.
And so I would address it in that manner if I found myself in that situation.
But it's not public. It's
But it's
101.
but it's not public. I would not go stand up in front of the pulpit and chide the congregation and say, "Oh, y'all are all being awful and coming and attacking my husband." Absolutely not. If you have done something wrong, you need to be able to admit it. And if it's
Yeah.
wrong enough, have the humility to step down from the pulpit. Heaven forbid, but
Right.
that should be the case. And if you have offended someone, you have to be able to deal with that on your own because that was your choice. And if you haven't, then you should also be able to stand in knowing I am above reproach. I haven't done anything wrong. I can go talk to this person if there was a misunderstanding and let's figure it out.
Right.
But no, I don't think it is a pastor's wife's place to get up there and basically make a whole scene when
Yeah, don't do that.
if you're called to lead a church, then you should be able to do that, whether
Right.
it's in humility or correcting a misunderstanding, or apologizing, whatever that looks like, you should be
Right.
able to do it.
And this is why I married her, because she's very good like that.
I'm not meant to fight your battles.
No, you're not. God can do that. So, and I agree. No, the wife is, there are certain opportunities where a wife can say, simply correct behavior in the church generally. That also, I would say, it helps to have good elders
Mhm.
that can support you, correct you in private before it gets to that point. So again, I simply encourage men to find a church where the elders of the church are able to speak into your life, encourage you, correct you, ask you questions, share life with you. And again, this is a great thing. I love that about Vista Grande. Our elders, they're not perfect, but man, they're wonderful men who step in the gap alongside, not on top, not below, but alongside me and us, and we can do ministry well. Okay, here's another one. Oh, this is a good one. How do we avoid bringing church drama home? I think that's very easy. It's become very
It
easy.
didn't used to be very easy. It used to burden us awfully, but I think it's been, we'll deal with that tomorrow. Or that's ridiculous. We're just not going to get involved in that. Depending upon the situation, if it's
Right.
directly involving you, then that's a situation where it's you bring in elders and you bring in things and you have some meetings to address the situation, right? Of course, being a woman, there's always drama, it seems. Luckily, there's a whole lot less here than other churches I've been at or that we've been at. And so I think that was one of those finding that person that you can also talk to for me, and having Caitlin to talk to has helped because they don't have to burden you with dumb stuff. And she is sometimes.
Hold on, time out. So that is not to say we don't talk to each other. That is to say We still talk about things, but you have someone else who can give you a third party perspective.
Right. And someone who's maybe aware of the silliness that's going on with ladies gossiping or getting hurt feelings over silly things.
Or just church life. Sometimes church life gets,
Right.
it's not all a
Right.
bed of roses.
Especially when you're dealing with church politics too and that sort of stuff. Sometimes it gives me a sounding wall to kind of get out some of the emotion.
Yeah.
And we can discuss it more calmly. And kind of have a united front about those sorts of things. Sometimes we just don't talk about it at home. If it's not really pertaining, like it's really that urgent and it's just people getting upset over things and they need some time to calm down or whatever, sometimes we just don't bring it home. It just stays at church or it stays at the office. It stays over there and we don't bring it at home. We also are very careful not to talk about certain things in front of our children because they don't need that drama. They don't need that pressure. Many times it's not their business, but that also affects them emotionally. And so that can prolong home drama that's not necessary.
I think we're speaking to the wisdom of learning when to listen, learning when to speak, learning to listen well, which, by the way, if you know us in any way, shape, or form, listening well is a challenge because we want to, we like being right. And that's something that
Yes.
we work on because we know ourselves better. And that means we need to slow down, watch how we speak to each other, how we are communicating, and then do that. Are we perfect at it? No, but we have gotten better. And that is a good thing. Again, I like the compliment that we receive from people here where they know we are real. We don't try to hide things. I mean, we are who we are without being overbearing and without being
Inappropriate or
with people,
right.
always keeping that in mind, which the concept of church politics, which is something that comes up in pastoral training, it did for me, is the idea that there's going to be where you have to almost like shake hands, kiss babies, and do stump speeches. I will say this. I don't feel like I've ever had to do that in a sense, not outwardly in the shall we say, it's intentional. This is the purpose I'm here. I think for me, my desire is I want to know people. Now, in the course of wanting to know people, loving people, serve people, there's conversations that happen, especially if we have a shared interest and if we have a shared ministry and vision. But it's not like, oh, I'm going to come to brother so and so or sister so and so I can ask them for $20,000 for
Right.
this program or this need, or I'm gonna go and visit so and so I can tell them we need this particular need met at the church. I think church politics, in the sense that most people would understand, are not healthy for the simple reason that it places men at the center and God is pushed out to the periphery, to the outside. Again, one of the things I love about where we are at Vista Grande Church is that we get to see people earnestly praying, earnestly trying to love one another, imperfect as we all are, but always trying to honor God. And that has been encouraging. And it enables us to practice good things in our marriage, personally, individually. And I think that's made our marriage better because we get to actually cultivate our own relationship with God, our boys' relationship with God, and we get to use that as the bedrock to minister to our church. And it's not in the flashiness, it's not in the programs upon programs, it's more about the relationships upon relationships so that people know it's not about the guy who preaches on Sunday. It's not about his wife and family. It's about everyone who gathers here because we love God and we love one another and we want to grow that love for other people.
Yeah.
So,
I would say in the beginning, I think there was almost this acquiescence to church politics, like it is what it is. We just have to deal with
right.
it. And initially, I think we tried to skirt it a lot.
Mm.
You know, how do we kind of just try to avoid it and not face issues head on because we don't want to deal with it or create tension or division, right? But I think as time has gone on, we generally have less and less patience for it, and not in an ungracious way, but it's often not scripturally based. It's often me, myself, and I, and what I want, or how do I make this agenda happen. I think we notice it quicker when it is a thing that happens. I think the leadership plays a huge role into how pervasive church politics are. If you have a leadership established that's not willing to deal with it or likes to play the game, it's even with all your best intentions, it's much harder to sort of quench those sort of issues because it's so deeply ingrained.
Right.
It's not to say you can't, but you need a lot of unification and leadership. If
Right.
you have a leadership that doesn't put up with that generally anyway, and they're more willing to say, that's not okay, we need to do this the right way, then it's much easier to deal with that. And I think we're at a point now where we're able to say, no, that's not how things are done biblically. And so how do we deal with this biblically, right? Rather than, okay, someone's doing triangulation or trying to manipulate a situation. We can we're more confident to address it directly and say, look, this isn't how we do this. You have a
Right.
problem or you have something that needs to be done. XYZ is the process, not all this.
And that changes from church to church.
Right,
So we have many churches that are congregational led, staff led. Here we are elder led.
right,
And I think my favorite so far, and which I would argue is closest to the biblical model, is where we are right now, where we have a plurality of elders, where and even the congregation, they're encouraged every so often from the pulpit. If I say something that does not match the record, you are responsible to come and ask questions.
right,
And if need be, to beat me over the head with a study Bible, preferably the ESV study Bible, because it's about this thick, you know? And so they have the responsibility, members and elders alike, to hold me to account so that we can then address a situation. And
right,
it does not become an issue at that point.
right,
Because at that point is I can explain this is what I meant, this is how I get here, or I can say, I'm sorry. I will correct that and I will make it public. So if I can share something to help us to close this, it would be this. When it comes to how we deal with boundaries, with politics in the church, relationships and dynamics, always, 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 the closer we are to Christ, the easier it becomes for us to know where north is,
right,
right? So no one in the church is our enemy. No one in the church is an adversary. They're a brother or a sister who may be intending to accomplish something good, but is going about it the wrong way.
right.
If someone is truly just out of ill intent trying to do something, that's altogether different. But that calls into question um, the need for
Church
church discipline.
discipline.
And beyond that, as it comes to our marriage, the family can share in the ministry, they can share in the work, but they do not share the heavy burden. That is for the pastor alone.
Mhm.
What do I mean by that? You don't get to hear everything that happens in meetings. You don't get to hear everything that happens in counseling. You don't get to hear
Right,
any negatives that come against me because that would hinder and stunt the growth that you and the boys can have here. You do not need to hear that. You do need to know, hey, just pray, or I'm just, it's hard. Just pray for not the situation, but you can say, just pray for me as I handle ministry, or
mhm,
just pray for me as I'm going into counseling sessions or
right,
into business meetings. And it also has a lot to do with how the church is structured to function. So, for example, Vista Grande Church, one business meeting a year. I love that about this church because they focus on the operation side, money, because that's how everything is governed. How do we spend the resources that people donate to the church? And then the elders are entrusted to keep stewardship of it throughout the year. And if something crazy happens throughout the year, then we report it to the church. Not only that, we also practice, for example, as a matter of structure, open book accounting. That means anyone who visits the church, anyone who's a member, can always come in and they can say, can I see how the financials are being kept? They can have access to that. The only thing people will never see is who gives money and how much. They see how we steward the resources. And another thing is everybody's empowered to serve and to minister so that it's not just the elite Christians here and everyone else down there. We're not the type of church. Every disciple has been given a talent, a gift, a ministry. It is our job, my job as a pastor, the elders, and the whole church to encourage each other to not be about politics, but be about ministry. Do you have any closing thoughts?
just an encouragement for any pastors' wives who struggle with that conflict, or maybe you're a bit of a gossip yourself and it's something you're working on, because sometimes it's hard not to, especially because you can sometimes be privy to more. People may share with you more, or you happen to know more. Respect the boundaries. Obviously, you need to have safeguards in place for you and your husband to protect his integrity, but you also need to respect those boundaries of confidentiality. So helps you be less tempted to gossip, and also be a support. He's going to come against criticism, and some of it you may know because he may share it, or someone may share it with you. And those are areas for you to be honest where you need to be honest and say, hey, yeah, I mean, there have been times where I said, hey, you said this and I know you didn't mean it that way, but someone who doesn't know you as well may come across this way, or it may come across ungracious. So you might want to
Right.
kind of be mindful of some of those things. And he'll take that into consideration, but also encourage him and say, hey, you know what? If he messed up, he messed up. I'll pray for you. Let's work on fixing it.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what? Maybe they didn't understand what you said. This might be worth the conversation. Sometimes that extra input helps give him perspective, but also knows you're praying for him and encouraging him and still supporting him, even if he did mess up a little and needs to go amend something. So
There you go. This is Disciple Makers. To Live is Christ. This is my lovely wife, Catherine, and this is the series on doing ministry together. We will see you next time.